Mark Carney is going to have to, at a certain point, own the decisions that he's making. And I'm sorry, but we cannot afford to do this liberal budgeting for another second longer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest that we've been itching to get onto Northern Perspective for months now. This is a person who was on the other side of the political spectrum, so to speak, not in terms of liberal versus conservative, but in terms of commentator versus politician. So today we are issuing a warm welcome to the former host of the Andrew Lawton Show. Andrew Lawton, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Hey, it's great to be with you. I've been big fans of you for a long time, so I was glad to be finally on the show.
Likewise, and we got to meet you at one of the London rallies right before the election, as we were just talking about off camera. And you know, we tried to make it work, didn't get it to work because an election was called, and everyone gets busy during those times. So, but let's just break it down. You were a commentator. And before we ask you how you decided to run, how did you actually get involved in political commentary in the first place?
I have always been interested in politics, going back to when I was a teenager, and literally it was the high school civics class that sparked this interest, and probably not having friends also. But what ended up happening was I had gotten involved volunteering, and I'd been involved in conservative politics and on my local riding association. And then I started to really get interested in blogging and podcasting before these were really verbs that were well known. And I, in doing so, wrote about and talked about what I knew and liked, which was politics. And that ended up putting me down the path of media and away from partisanship. I had always been a right of center commentator. I'd always been more conservative, but I got out of the party side of things. And I've always hovered around the margins. I've obviously had a warmer reception from conservative politicians through my media career than I have from the Liberals. Conservatives have never called the cops on me, for example. But eventually, when I started to realize, hey, you know, there's a career path here, I really loved it, and for a time couldn't have imagined doing anything else, including what I'm doing now. And
then you landed on True North with the Andrew Lawton Show, and I think a lot of people were disappointed in a way when you announced that you were actually going to run, because that meant no more Andrew Lawton Show. So, what led you to that decision?
It was a couple of things. And I will say on that point, I met someone when I was canvassing in St. Thomas who was a huge fan of mine. And she'd said, like, listen, I love you. I've loved you since you were on the radio. I love your show on True North. I don't know if I'm going to vote for you. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, if you lose, the show will come back, right? I said, I'll try to find a way to give you a podcast if I win. Please vote for me. And she did in the end. But so I wrote a biography about Pierre, the leader of the Conservatives. And that project started out from a place of interest. You know, I've known about Pierre, I've followed his career. I interviewed him in the 2021 election, and he was at the time the only politician in Canada talking about inflation and talking about some of these financial issues that were plaguing the country. And then during the kind of the period after he became the leader, I was like, you know, one of the things that's missing in Canada, which we get in the United States, is these books that really do a full picture of who our leader is. And I wanted to do that as a journalist because I felt that I wanted to learn more, and I knew Canadians would as well. And it was in the course of writing that book that I really became quite intrigued with where we are right now as a country and where the Conservative Party is and what Pierre was doing at the time, but is doing for the party and the movement in the country. And by the end of writing that book, and once it was probably a couple of months after I'd finished writing it, and before it had come out yet, and I had just had time to reflect on it, I said, you know, I can't see spending this election on the sidelines. The stakes are too high right now, and I want to be a part of the solution. I don't just want to be commenting on the election. I don't want to be just observing it. I want to be a part of this. And that led to the path that I went on, which is seeking the nomination and then eventually running in the election, and now sitting here as a member of parliament, which, a year ago I wanted, a year and a half ago had no idea. This is where I'd be right now.
Well, as I always tell people when they ask, how should I approach life? I just said, ride the wave. Because life will take you in places that you never thought you would go. And I find if you try and fight against that wave, that's when you get into trouble. But so that's interesting. I was going to actually ask you about your biography of Pierre Poilievre. For those that are interested, highly recommend the book. And I think it's important for people to read, even if they're not a conservative, because one of the problems I think that we saw in this last election is how Pierre was presented to the general public at large. And we've had the benefit of having multiple conversations with him and his wife, publicly and privately. And the one thing that really stuck out to us is he is just a really genuine guy, and his heart is solely Canadian. He cares about this country a lot. So does his wife Anna, and I think that was missed on a lot of people when they were evaluating which party and which leader to vote for in this election. What was your full impression of him after actually writing this book?
The one thesis that emerged was how consistent he's been on his core beliefs and values for the entirety of his adult life, and even going back into his adolescence. I mean, I spent a lot of time going through everything he's ever written or said, basically. And so much so that now that I'm speaking to him as a colleague, I have to avoid being weird by just knowing things that he's probably forgotten. He's even shared this with me. You wrote about things, Andrew, that I didn't even know about. I forgot. So I try not to be that guy. But what was interesting is that I found, letters to the editor that he wrote as a teenager, where he's talking about things that are almost identical to the things he's championing now. And it's not that he hasn't matured or grown. It's that he has been anchored in this core idea of getting government out of people's lives, of allowing business to thrive, of putting people more in control of their lives and their finances and all of that. And the essay that I encourage people to read, and I quote it liberally, is an essay that he wrote as a student entering into a contest that was sponsored by Magna. And the title, the prompt of the essay that all entrants had to follow was, "As Prime Minister, I would." And as a biographer, you're rarely going to get something as good as that from someone at 20 years old writing about things they'd want to do as prime minister. And even some of the language in that essay mirrors the language of his speech announcing his leadership in 2022. And that, to me, because one of the frustrations that I've had as a conservative commentator is how inauthentic and flip-floppy some conservatives have been, including conservative leaders in my party. And for me, seeing someone that I had no doubt would remain focused and remain anchored, that is the leader that I would get behind. That is the leader who I would run and stand alongside in an election and in a parliament.
Well, and it's interesting that you differentiate core beliefs, because what people need to understand, because there's going to be some people that say, well, he used to say this and now he doesn't say this. Yes, but there's peripheral beliefs, but then there's the core anchor in which you're talking about. You can say, this is what I believe, and there's different ways that you may look at achieving that. And those can change over time as you mature and gain more life experience. But
and as the country changes,
right.
As the landscape changes, yes.
Right, but to your point, to quote him from an interview that he did, he said if he were to rename the Conservative Party today, he would call it the Mind Your Own Damn Business Party.
Yes.
Because he genuinely believes that the government should mind its own damn business and get out of your life. And it should enable Canadians to actually achieve the Canadian dream, or as he says, the Canadian promise, and not tie them down and make them utterly dependent on the federal government, which is what the Liberals are trying to do. Do you find that Carney is trying to continue that let's just call it ideology of Justin Trudeau?
One of the problems that I think Carney is posing right now is that he's like a bouncing football in a lot of ways, where you have no idea where he's going to go on certain issues. And I think part of that is a consequence of the fact that despite how He's been involved in some of these key decisions that the government has made for so long, and we've heard what he thinks about, environmental finance and some of these things that he's been tied in with the UN on, and the Century Initiative and all of that. There are a lot of things that we don't know about him, and a lot of things that he has not wanted to share, a lot of things that he just, by virtue of what path he's had, he hasn't shared on, and we don't know how he's going to land on it. And look, I want nothing more than for the country to succeed. I want the country to be in the best hands possible. I've been very concerned about the vision that Mark Carney has put forward, and the people that he's surrounded himself with, who are indistinguishable from those that were around Trudeau. And I joked a little while ago with someone, I can't remember if it was on the record or off the record, but I had found an old question period clip, and I looked at it and I thought it was a recent question period clip because the front bench was virtually the same. It was all the same ministers there. And then I realized, oh no, that was before this so-called new government. People like David Lametti, who was a Trudeau minister and now he's a Carney advisor. People like Stephen Guilbeault, one of the most radical left-wing members of the Trudeau cabinet, is now on the front bench of the Liberal cabinet. Gary Anandasangri, the public safety minister, who doesn't even seem to know what his job title is, let alone anything in it. Again, through the ranks of the Trudeau government now here. So I have not seen from Mark Carney the things that someone who truly wanted to distinguish themselves from their predecessor would have done, apart from a few flashy things right out of the gate.
Right. Well, as we led up to election night, there was a lot of back and forth between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, and all of the other candidates, such as yourself, were busy running around to every door they could find to knock on it. What was it like on election night? Because I know there was some concern between a lot of the candidates, the MPs, even the MPs that ended up winning. There was some concern depending on how the polls were in their riding. So walk us through election night at your headquarters.
It was really, really tough because I knocked on, I think it was when all is said and done, about 6,000 doors myself during the campaign. My team did about 27,000. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we were aggressively knocking on doors morning, afternoon, night, right up to election, basically right up until like 30 minutes before the polls closed. And the really nerve-wracking part is once 9:30 p.m. hits and you have nothing you can do. Like, there is nothing you can do except worry and panic and wait. And when poll results were coming in, we were seeing that we had maintained a lead over my main opponent, which was a Liberal in my riding. But the challenge in my riding is that it's very geographically diverse. We've got a bit of South London, which has the typical voting inclinations of a suburban seat or suburban area. We have St. Thomas, which is a city that, again, has grown so much, so it doesn't vote the way you necessarily know. And then we've got rural areas, which have always been really good conservative strongholds. So you're seeing polls come in, but you don't know where they're coming from. And I'm like, well, if this is, a St. Thomas poll that just came in, I've won the election. If this is a rural poll, I'm screwed. Just because the lead was not enough to justify, it's that sort of worry. So, but you start doing this panic, because for me, this is my first time running in a federal election. I ran provincially once before, did not succeed. But this was the moment for me that I felt like we're going to get this. And all you can do is worry once polls close. And then it wasn't until I think probably around 11:15, 11:20 that we finally had, one of the news outlets had called it, and we thought our margin was strong enough that, okay, I've won this. And then it's just elation at that point. But then, of course, you have the bittersweet counterbalance to that, which is that things didn't go nationally the way that we wanted them to go, and that I'd be going to Ottawa as a member of parliament, yay, but in opposition, not as yay. So that was the really challenging part. And even the next day, we had people coming into the campaign office, and we're over the moon because we won. And people are coming in the door and being, oh, this is terrible. This is the worst thing ever. I'm like, oh yeah. Like we had to separate ourselves out from our local experience and understand what people were going through in the country that really wanted a break from the Liberals. And this election didn't get it.
Do you, in talking to your new colleagues now, Was that experience that you just described, was that different between people that were longtime conservatives that had won for maybe the fourth, fifth, or sixth time, or versus somebody new like yourself? Was that different in that you were elated that you won, the first time that you won, that you ran, versus the people that were probably fairly certain that they were going to win their riding and they were just saddled with that disappointment? Was it different?
I think it was just a different election. And I think the thing that because my riding has been conservative since 2004. But I said to my team from the outset and every day, I said, I don't want to ever hear the word safe seat, because there's no such thing as a safe seat. The Liberals thought St. Paul's was a safe seat until it wasn't last summer. And we need to earn every vote. There are so many things in any election that can work for you or against you. And I didn't want to take anything for granted. And in the end, I think that was quite good, because the NDP collapse had monumental implications for the whole political map nationally. In some cases, it helped us out. I mean, the Conservatives won seats in areas that had been New Democrat strongholds, including in London Fanshawe. That was a great win for the Conservatives. Hamilton East, Stony Creek, with Ned Couric, who's my he was my seatmate, but now he's across the aisle because we moved over one. But so that was great. But again, a lot of the time, the NDP collapse consolidated behind the Liberals. And meant that you could get 48% of the vote and still conceivably lose. Like, these were the numbers that we were very worried about during the election, with an NDP that you'd normally expect to have 15, 20 in a particular riding, and they go down to 3 or 4%. But I also, at the same time, for me, viewed it as being a moment where after the election ends, the election is over. And whether you win by 1 vote or 50 votes or 5,000 votes, you have a job to do. And even though the Conservatives didn't win, all of the problems that we set out to solve are still there. And we now have to work extra hard from opposition to deliver solutions. And that's a mandate that I take very seriously.
So what are the people in your riding saying to you are the most important issues for them?
Affordability and cost of living has never gone away. It's still there, and we're still seeing a lot of the struggle that we've seen over the last year and a half. The one that has become, I'd say, issue number one is crime and justice issues. We've had some symbolic, they're not symbolic, they're very real, but what I mean by symbolic is that there's stories that really capture the problem. One of them was a historic building in downtown St. Thomas about a month ago that was burned down by someone who was on bail and was a convicted arsonist. And as it happened, that had been my campaign office, that building.
Well,
that's right.
And it's funny you say that, because this is you and Larry Brock.
Yep. Yeah, that was during the election. So he came down to talk about crime and justice issues. Yep.
And this is after.
Same place. But we couldn't get to where we were standing when that photo was taken. But that is the same building in downtown St. Thomas, a building 144 years old. Burned down by a repeat offender, a prolific offender, police say. And this is, again, no one was injured, thankfully. Now, what you can't see in that photo, to Larry's and my right, there's an apartment building that was attached to it, which is for people who are very vulnerable, people who would otherwise be homeless. And if that building had not been fortified as well as it had been, it very likely could have been a fatal fire. And that we're so grateful it wasn't. But this story really, I think, reinvigorated the discussion and the need for bail reform in our community. And that's been something that I'm championing as a local representative, but also as someone on the House Justice Committee, where I'm going to have a direct line into these justice and crime issues that we're talking about and need to talk about nationally.
And this is a good time just to remind everybody of Larry Brock's petition for bail reform. His goal is 1 million signatures. You can find the links in the description of this video and in the pinned comment. If you have not signed it, please sign it. And if you have signed it, please share it. This is a nonpartisan issue. Party lines don't matter when it comes to these people just wrecking and destroying people's lives, destroying property. And there's too many tragedies in Canada with with repeat violent offenders and people that are just taking advantage of our criminal injustice system, as they say. So thank you very much for your support in that,
Absolutely.
Andrew, with Larry Brock.
So this is the first time you ran. What was it like walking onto Parliament Hill for the first time?
It was it's hard to describe because I interned on Parliament Hill about 15 years ago. So as an intern, you walk around like you own the place because you're 19 and you have an ID badge that lets you go to all of these things that other people are waiting in line for. And I had a lot more humility going in as a member of Parliament than I did as a 19-year-old intern, because you walk in there and, what I said in my maiden speech, and I'm actually a bit emotional talking about it, was that it is not my seat. And I am a steward of the seat for as long as the people of Elgin, St. Thomas, London South let me sit there. And I took it as a tremendous honor, but a tremendous responsibility, because I have seen on the media side, where it's easy to be a bit more jaded and cynical about it all, how much politicians have let people down and how much the systems and institutions we rely on as a country have let people down. And, one of the things, to go back to my biography about Pierre, that really moved me about him was how people he spoke to, especially during the leadership. I mean, we remember the dark days of the 2022 when that leadership race came. People that couldn't vote for him in the leadership because they did not have $15 to their name to buy a party membership. Like people who were literally pennies away from having nothing at all. And I heard from a lot of those people as well when I was doing my show. I heard from those people in the campaign, and I continue to hear from people in situations like that, maybe not as dramatic all the time, but still people in very, very dire situations. And to go into a role that I genuinely went in because I want to help people and I want to make the country and my community a better place, a safer place, a freer place, the pressure that I put on myself to be able to deliver. And all of that is there when I walk onto the floor of the House of Commons. And it's not to say that I couldn't feel the excitement and the joy and the achievement, but I was just itching to get to work. And that was the feeling. It was actually kind of frustrating in a way because things move quickly. You get elected. We got elected on a Monday. I got an orientation call from the House of Commons at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. I thought maybe I would have time to do my laundry and clean my house after the election. I really didn't. But, and then a week later, I was in Ottawa for orientation. And then a couple of weeks later, I was there getting sworn in. But it's like all of that's movement. But I'm like, I want to get to work. And that's why it was actually kind of frustrating when on the Justice Committee, we were trying to get stuff done. We wanted to put a motion, Larry did, on bail reform. And after 16 minutes, the Liberals moved to adjourn the meeting for the summer without having done anything at all. And, yes, I'm doing a lot of work this summer. I'm meeting with stakeholders. I'm talking to constituents. I'm going to events in the riding. But I want to actually act on these things that I was sent to Ottawa to act on. And it was really frustrating that the Liberals were so hell-bent on having their summer break start when all of this stuff in the country was still demanding action.
Well, and it's interesting that you convey your perception of just the gravity of that responsibility on your shoulders that you take on, because one of the things that we've been seeing, and no doubt you've been seeing and hearing, is there is a profound mistrust of our government. A lot of people lump in all of the politicians together, regardless of party. And what we've been saying, but we've also been seeing leading up to that 2025 election, was that a new breed of politician is needed for Canada. And it's a breed of integrity, of responsibility. And every candidate that we had the privilege of meeting for the Conservative Party, they exemplified that. And they came from literally all walks of life: paramedics, commentators, lawyers, doctors, you name it. And all of those voices are needed. But the main, I would say, common principle between all of them is we need to do something not just for ourselves, but for our community. And I remember when we met Michael Barrett for the first time in Peterborough, and we had asked him kind of, how does he approaching his responsibility, and does he understand how much hope Canadians place in him? And he said, we feel it every day. He said, I constantly feel it on my shoulders, the nation relying on him. And we see that whenever Canadians are watching committee, whenever they're, watching any of the politicians thunder away at the Liberals for any number of corruption scandals that we're seeing. So is that a fair assessment from your perspective? Because you see these people behind the scenes. You see them not on camera, not asking you to divulge any conversations. But is that perception accurate, do you think? Is there a new breed of politician that we are now sending to Ottawa in terms of the Conservatives?
I really think so. And, to use myself as an example, I actually think, there are times that someone like me would never have even been allowed as a candidate because I have a record of being outspoken and calling a spade. And I've criticized Conservative politicians in the past that I don't feel have lived up to what people expect of them. And you look at someone like Roman Baber, my colleague on the Justice Committee. Here's a guy who was kicked out of caucus provincially for standing up for millions and millions and millions of people in the province. And, he is not looked down on by the federal Conservative Party as, oh, this guy's going to, cause us some problems. He's welcomed in with open arms, ran for the leadership. Now he's a very prominent MP. Jamil Javani, incredible broadcaster, Aaron Gunn, documentary filmmaker. Like, no offense to lawyers. I love lawyers. I have a lot of lawyer friends. But people expect that politicians are all just, they're just lawyers and, rich business people and whatever. And I look at the new crop of MPs, and that's not what we have there. We have people that have come from, as you say, all walks of life, all backgrounds, and more importantly, people that are very strongly principled. And the amount of bench strength we have as a party now, because when I wrote about Pierre, I also was writing, in effect, a history of the Conservative Party of Canada. I think that was an important story to tell. And I can't tell you when I've ever seen just the sheer number of really strong members of the caucus, and even old timers have said that. Like, they look around and just are so impressed by who we have there right now. And I think, I don't quote me on this, but I think someone told me that every single member had an opportunity to speak in that first 4 weeks that we were back from the end of April or the end of May and until the end of June. And, that's incredible that everyone, despite having a larger caucus, was able to get up and speak, and they all had something really valuable to say.
Right, and I think Ned Keurig had even mentioned something to the effect of that some of the people that were first elected in the 2021 election were looking at all of the new people getting to speak this time and saying, hey, I didn't get to speak.
I don't know about that part, but I don't want to get into any fights there. But I can say that there is a really incredible team there, and everyone has something to offer. And we've already seen even this summer on some of the committees that have been recalled, like, really incredible work that's being done by the whole team, but in particular the newbies, people that really just rose to the challenge quite quickly.
So what is something that you're hoping to bring to Parliament? Like, what kind of Andrew thing do you want to bring to Parliament?
So one that was a really personal issue for me was stopping the expansion of assisted suicide to people with mental illness. I have been outspoken about my own struggles with depression and suicide in the past, and this was something that I actually, when I sought the nomination, made a priority and talked about during the campaign. And I'm so glad to see Tamara Jansen have a private member's bill, Bill C-218, which will stop that. Currently, it's set to go into effect in 2027, and it will go into effect unless legislation is passed to stop it. So that is a huge priority for me personally, and I've been working even over the summer trying to make sure we get cross-partisan support on that. I also, to go to the big picture, I said in my maiden speech that I wanted to and want to make Canada a freer place. And dovetailing off of the Mind Your Own Damn Business Party that we were talking about earlier, I want to really foster this idea of government getting out of the way. because we've seen that government has this reverse Midas touch in so many ways, where everything it touches just turns to absolute crap. And we need to ensure that people are empowered to make their own decisions. And look at some of the recent examples of this. You have in the city of Montreal saying that you need a permit to have a worship concert at a church. You have, CRA, which was looking at the recommendation of taking away charitable status for churches and synagogues and mosques that are doing incredible work in their communities as charitable enterprises. You have some of the decisions that were made during the COVID period, which, again, I want to move beyond, but we also have to acknowledge this and not let the country go down this road again. So, I think that sometimes we need people that are going to stand in the chamber of government, stand in the House of Commons and yell no when things like that happen. And that's something that I take on.
Well, and we've even seen courageous Conservative members of Parliament stand in the chamber and yell liar in the middle of the proceedings as well, to the point where they are named and then ejected. But
it's almost as bad as saying wacko in the House of Commons, yeah.
Well, not if you're Peter Julian, apparently. So, but this is what we see, and this is what Canadians want to see. They want to see that there's people that actually have the courage and the principle of standing up and saying, no, this is not going to happen, not on my watch, and not on the watch of my constituents. Mm-hmm. Enough is enough, and Canadians are sick and tired of what's going on, and we're already starting to see and hear about buyer's remorse when it comes to Mark Carney. We've heard from multiple candidates in multiple ridings where they have people coming up to them and saying, I think I made a mistake, and as the Conservative MP or the candidate, you can't really say anything, but well, that's between you and your vote. So maybe you need to change your vote next time. And there was a recent poll that came out. What was it? 47% of Canadians.
57% of Canadians felt that they were uninformed or underinformed regarding the election.
I had a young woman that I met during the campaign at her door, and I'd said, Andrew Lawton, you're a Conservative candidate. Can I count on your vote in the next election? She said, well, I read that Mark Carney has a PhD, and that seems like the kind of thing that we need right now for the country. I was like, and I asked, a couple of questions and whatever, and that was all she knew. That was all she knew. And again, I don't insult people. I mean, part of my vision is that I want to make it so that the system works well enough. People don't need to pay attention if they don't want to. But that was the sole calculation. I met someone just today, actually, that the thing I came from before I came here, someone who said she voted for Mark Carney for the sole reason of she believed that he would get a deal with Trump. And she regrets it because she has not seen the thing that she was promised. And a lot of the promises that he made, interprovincial trade barriers, they're all going to be gone by Canada Day. And then that goalpost got moved. And deal with Trump, that goalpost got moved. And all of these other things where he'll take some of our policies, which is good. As Pierre says, take them all, take our whole platform. But he doesn't do that. He'll take a few little tokens and then in the end commit to the same failed liberal policies that have gotten us into the mess we're in now without delivering on some of these promises. So I think the role of the official opposition is still as important as ever.
So going into the fall, I think Mark Carney, or we think Mark Carney, is going to have his hands full with a lot of these failed promises, with achieving virtually nothing. One of the things that I know they were patting themselves on the back for was this middle-class tax cut that for seniors, I think we worked it out, was about 14 cents a day that they actually receive back in income tax, and the average Canadian, it was something like $20 a month or something like that. So, but there's questions about the BC ferries, there's questions now, well, there's over 500 questions about his conflicts of interest. And you have this bizarre decision to take a stance on the Jerusalem, or sorry, the Israel-Palestine issue that now has everybody angry with him. So, what can we expect from the Conservatives coming into the fall, or is that in the playbook that we shouldn't be talking about here?
Well, I think that we need to ensure that every dollar of taxpayer money is being spent well, that any promise that was made that would make the country a better place is being followed through on. But I will say there are a couple of big problems that we're going to see in the fall, and one of which is a budget. Hopefully, they didn't produce one in the spring, but they could. They've said there will be one in the fall. We don't know how bad it's going to be. All we can see from the indicators that have been made available to us is that it's going to be bad. We're going to see a massive, massive deficit. It's going to make Chrystia Freeland's so-called fiscal guardrail just like so small you can barely see it because it's so far in the distance. And we are going to see him, I presume, blame Justin Trudeau for it, which would have been more believable had the budget come right after the election.
And more believable if he hadn't been advising Justin
if he hadn't
Trudeau
been the
since
economic
2020.
advisor for Trudeau. But it's interesting you mention that, because whenever he's been challenged on that, the Prime Minister, he says, oh, well, he didn't take all of my advice. But he's never provided the itemized list of, okay, what advice did you give that was followed and wasn't? And at a certain point, I'm sure it's going to move to, well, he didn't follow any of my advice, to which it's, well, why did you stay on as an advisor for so long? But you know, like Justin Trudeau used to love blaming Stephen Harper, which got more and more tiresome when he had been, in office for 10 years. But he was still blaming Harper right up until the end. Mark Carney is going to have to, at a certain point, own the decisions that he's making. And I'm sorry, but we cannot afford to do this liberal budgeting for another second longer. We can't afford the rampant inflation it's causing. We can't afford the tax increases. And we can't afford to just keep printing money, which seems to be the liberal way. So I'm very concerned about what is going to be in that budget at this point.
Well, one thing that we can look forward to is the official opposition holding Mark Carney and the Liberals to account. Canadians are very interested to see how committee goes in all of these committees, including Justice, including OGO and Ethics, and all of those. So we look forward to watching you and the rest of your colleagues really hold this government to account and make sure that our taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.